Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to our 100 Days of Full Stack App Challenge. We are on day 5, and we are working in the context of our case study application that we are building. And today we will focus on building that initial infrastructure and then deploy a placeholder application. And we will just focus on building that front-end application. We are not building any other services today. And in the reference architecture diagram, we have lots of additional services, but we will be just focusing on the CloudFront and S3 bucket today. And if you're new to AWS, do not worry at the moment about what is CloudFront, why do we need CloudFront, and why S3 bucket, why are we not deploying into server. Please hang in there. We will learn a lot more about it in the next few steps. So for today, take this infrastructure as a suggested infrastructure and move forward. And we will learn more about each of these services and why we are using this combination of services a little later. And I also included lots of links in this guide today that will allow you to learn more about and understand more, but we will also discuss later in the challenge as well. So this is our reference architecture. We'll just focus on setting up our CloudFront and S3 bucket. So we'll create our Angular app as well today and just put some placeholder content. So before we start, you must have your AWS account set up already. If you haven't, go ahead and click this link and go and set up your AWS account. And another prerequisite that you require is to install Node.js on your machine. So based on whether you're using Windows machine or a Mac or a Linux terminal, go ahead and hit this link up and you will be able to download the appropriate installation package and then set it up on your machine. There are a lot more instructions on that nodejs.org site that will help you to install on your machine. And once those prerequisites are all good, let us go ahead and set up AWS CDK. And you may pause the video right now, go ahead and take care of AWS account and Node.js and come back and we'll continue with the CDK. I also included one important link here, which is the Getting Started document. This has a lot more explanation and more alternate ways of doing this setup. So if you would like to check it out first before we start, that's great. But the instructions that I give in this document are good to go and you should be able to get everything working. But in case if you want to learn more or if you run into any issues, please go ahead and hit this link up and then learn more. And you should be able to troubleshoot pretty quickly. So the first thing that we will do is install AWS CDK itself on our machine. So go ahead and copy this command and run it on your terminal. npm install -g AWS CDK. Once this installation is complete, you can run CDK -version. If it shows the CDK version, that means everything is set up and we are good to go. And the next thing is to set up your AWS access information on the terminal environment so that all subsequent commands that we are going to run using CDK will use this particular AWS account to be able to create those resources in your AWS account. If you have multiple AWS accounts on your machine setup, you will be able to use profile as well. But I would suggest, even if you have multiple accounts and profile setup, set up these environment variables so that you can consistently follow the rest of the documentation and avoid any kind of confusion on which account you are using for subsequent steps. So go ahead and set up these environment variables as well. If you need more information or more help on where to get this information, hit up this link on Getting Started link I included here for more, and you should be able to get started under 5 minutes, even if you're doing it for the first time. Next thing that we need to do for CDK is also do a bootstrap. This will set up the placeholders for hosting all your deployment artifacts. We don't directly deal with this the CDK will be using this to manage your deployments. We just need to set it up and let it know which account we are using. So go ahead and run this CDK Bootstrap AWS, put your account number here and the region that you will be using. I'm using US East 1, so you will see this reference in the rest of the documentation too, wherever possible, but you should be able to use any region that is supported in AWS. Okay, now that the Bootstrap is done, the first thing that we will do here is to create a project and then initialize our CDK project, which will host the infrastructure part, and then we will create our Angular application. So step number one, let's go ahead and create a folder for our project, give it whatever app name you want to give it, and then change the directory. So you're running this inside that project directory. So go into your project directory and create a new CDK project. And I'm going to use TypeScript as the language to create the CDK stack. And CDK does support additional languages too, but let us stick with TypeScript for this particular challenge. So run CDK init app and choose the TypeScript as the language. This will create a folder structure for your stack, just focusing on the infrastructure. And after this step, we will go and create our Angular app. So once you use this particular init step is complete, you should see a lib folder in your project folder. That lib folder is where your stack lives, and go ahead and open that file. And this also follows your folder name. If your if your folder name is, let us say, test, then in the lib folder, you will find test-stack.ts. So that will be your primary file where you will be building the stack, the infrastructure stack. And I included a few more links here that will help you to understand what we are trying to do and why we are trying to do. But if this is the first time, don't worry too much about it. Use the code to get started. You will learn more about these as we go forward. So this is a sample code for the stack. And as I mentioned, open that your application name -stack.ts in the lib folder of your project. And you will see some placeholder content. Replace that placeholder content with this code. This stack name will be following exactly your folder name as well. So keep your stack name exactly the same as before, but you should be able to copy the rest of the code here. And make sure you also copy this top portion, which is where we are importing necessary modules into the app. First, we will set up an app name, and feel free to be creative and give an app name that you would like to use. And first, we'll create the origin access identity. This will allow us to give permissions to our CloudFront to access our S3 bucket. And S3 bucket is where we will be deploying our Angular app. And then we create our S3 bucket. And do not worry about all the options. We will come back and discuss a little bit more. And we're giving access to CloudFront to access that S3 bucket. And then we are creating a CloudFront distribution itself. And there are some rules. And the most important one is this for our Angular app to work. But since we only have one page when we create today as a placeholder, this is not necessarily we need to have it today, but important to set this up for future iterations. So once this is, you can just copy this code for now. And this is where we actually do the deployment. Please note that this deployment step doesn't include the build step internally. So you do the build first and then run the CDK command to deploy it. So this will take your output from your Angular app and deploy into an S3 bucket. And it also do an invalidation, which is essentially refreshing the CloudFront cache so that a newer version of your Angular app is always distributed everywhere in the world. So you can use this code to get started, and we will explain a little later, and you can learn a lot more about this a little later as well. So don't worry if you do not understand all these options for now. You should be able to copy paste it and change the name for sure. The stack name, the bucket name, the app name, feel free to change it to whatever values you want and get started. So once that step is complete, go ahead and set up Angular application. And if you are using and doing this for the first time, again, go ahead and install the Angular CLI. CLI is a great tool to bootstrap your Angular apps. So go ahead and install the Angular CLI and then create a new Angular project. I'm calling the Angular project as web app. You could give any name you want. Make sure if you give a different name, you need to adjust your folder structure here for the deployment to work. So if you use web app, you should be able to use the same code here. But if you give a different name, make sure you come back here and change this to the appropriate name. So we just create a web app, a new Angular app, and optionally go ahead and update your app.component.html file with some placeholder text. I just removed all the placeholder text Angular CLI generates, and I just put it as just a welcome message. Welcome to this app, which my app is called Continuous Accessibility. So just updated it to just say hello and welcome instead of the rest of the boilerplate that Angular CLI generates. So, and once that is done, you should be able to test it using ng-serve and then go ahead and build the app as well. ng-build will allow you to build the app. Once you build it, the artifacts or the final application that is ready for distribution will be stored in this folder and your app name. That's why I mentioned if you give a different name to your Angular app, make sure you change this as well here. So once that build is done, we are ready to deploy our application to AWS. This sets up the infrastructure, which includes the S3 bucket, the CloudFormation, CloudFront distribution, and associate the CloudFront distribution with your S3 bucket, and then deploy your Angular application to S3 bucket and refreshes the CloudFront distribution so that you should be able to access your application on the web once this is done. So make sure you're in the application, the project folder, and then run CDK syn. This is going to synthesize the CloudFormation template. This is optional. You don't need to do it, but if you do this, if there are any errors, if something is not set up, just like I mentioned, if you use a different name for your Angular app, or you haven't built your Angular app yet, it will not find the distribution folder, for instance. So you could easily figure out if any errors are thrown, but run CDK syns to make sure that it compiles properly and the stack could be deployed. And the next step is to the big step, and a little bit scary if you're doing it for the first time, but everything should be fine, nothing to worry about. Go ahead and do a CDK deploy. This is going to finalize your infrastructure stack, sets that up in AWS, and then deploy your Angular app into the S3 bucket. So when you run it for the first time, it may take anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes. And once everything is done, since we included some CFN outs, it also print those outputs. And I included a sample here to see what it look like. It will print the bucket name, distribution domain name, and distribution ID if you just copied my code. And what we are interested in is this, the distribution domain name. This is a subdomain that AWS creates for our application to be able to host on CloudFront. And we will use our custom domain later, but for now it will be just the cloudfront.net domain. And once you see these outputs, take this cloudfront.net URL, put it in a browser and open it, and you should be able to see your Angular landing page that you have created before. For example, this is my landing page that is deployed to CloudFront. That's all you need for today. If everything goes through, congratulations, you have successfully deployed your first Angular app in AWS environment with using infrastructure as code. I will explain a lot more about infrastructure as a code and why CDK is a great choice to work with AWS. But it's a great choice, and we will learn a lot more about it in the future. But now, celebrate, a pat on the back, and celebrate the success. Congratulations, you have successfully deployed your first AWS app in using your Angular and the CDK as your infrastructure as code. So go ahead and celebrate. And if you would like to learn more, there is a CDK workshop that also walks you through the CDK concepts step by step and let you build a sample project. You don't need to, but if you would like to learn more, go ahead and do that as well. But otherwise, we will move to the next step tomorrow and work on the application a little bit more, as well as start building additional services in AWS. That's all for now. Congratulations, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.